Boom, what's up everyone? Welcome to Simulation. I'm your host, Alan Sakyan. Really excited to be talking about closing the loop on currency, about designing our future. We have Ray Potter joining us. What's up, man?
What's up, man?
Thank you for coming on the show.
Yes, thank you for having me.
I'm really excited to talk about this topic. I love how deeply you've been studying civilization to figure this out, because this is one of the most pressing things we can do is figure out how to design this so that, like you're gonna go through and teach us, that the way we design currency is the way we design our life, the way we humanize each other, the way that we can best move forward. So I'm pumped.
Yeah, me too. And so, you know, it's very interesting times that we're living in right now. And just coming to the studio today with both of these fires raging in near San Francisco area and in LA, and seeing the fallout of that, and we're seeing all of these kind of catastrophic events and how we approach that, which lens we look at it. Is it my problem? Is it your problem? Or is it our problem? And that's kind of at the root of how we look at the problems that are in front of us, whether we see them as insurmountable challenges or we see them as something that we can actually see the whole thing, the whole picture, and close the loop on how we can move forward.
I like the way that you think about things, and I think your background gives us a really good understanding of the way you started thinking about things. I like calling you like a systems thinker, a design thinker. You think things through on like a very more of like an abstract scale, calculating as many variables as possible and then thinking about how it's going to affect the people that are using it. So why don't we talk a bit about how you started to get into interest about this?
Yeah.
So give us a bit on that before we go really deep.
Yeah, so my background is as a creative professional. Well, many layers, you know, I think from a young age, just the way things are set up never really made sense to me. I didn't really understand why we had to organize things in a particular order, you know, why somebody's life is more important than somebody else's life. Why, you know, there's things like discrimination or things like lack of opportunity. And I'll tell you kind of, you know, where that comes from. I was, you know, born and brought up in India for the first 10 years of my life. And a lot of that time I spent in rural India with my grandparents and actually seeing a lot of capacity, a lot of talent in the local kids, but didn't have the view of the city life or view of what is possible. So that's, you know, one aspect of growing up through my formative years. And then coming here, you know, we basically had the whole immigrant story. So now I'm in this place, I'm this little brown kid that does not speak English, and kind of learning that stuff on the fly, and then realizing that we went through these economic loops of coming through very difficult neighborhoods up into a very privileged neighborhood. And the contrast from both of those things were very striking to me. And I said, I don't understand why these kids that are super talented and creative don't get the opportunity, where these kids that grow up with privilege get all the opportunity in the world and they squander it. So I guess this is the way of the world, you think about that, but it always bothered me. So for my whole life as a professional, creative professional, being a designer, art director, creative director, and then in the 90s I was here in the Bay Area, got very lucky, very fortunate to work on first of a kind things before there were things. The first social networks, the first multi-sided marketplaces, the VoIP apps, a lot of things, or you know, even what you'd call narrowcast cable, you know, all of those kinds of things were part of my professional upbringing, and I lived and worked all over the world, and you get to see many sensibilities of how people live, how they see the world, how they perceive things, and the lack that the inequity of access, yet the abundance of talent, capacity everywhere. So this whole growing up as a designer, a creative communicator, product designer, systems architect, this was part of my professional life. And what happened back around 2008, 2009 time is we got involved in a project. I had a fancy title for a designer, which was, Director of Digital Innovation for a company that did a lot of work for big systems, municipalities, energy systems, and so on. And so during that time, I was kind of leading a project that was about architecting the energy efficiency education of what is the future of energy and all of that, right? So we produced the thing, and the end result of that was basically questioning some assumptions about the way we use energy and the underlying economic premise behind what types of energy generation, harvesting, distribution technologies are actually available versus how we actually use and burn fossil fuels, and what that whole extractive game or this economic game is about. And so many things occurred to me at that time. At the time I wrote a book. I had no idea about writing a book. But the right people got a chance to read it, and that started my quest for this last decade or so, really trying to understand at a systemic level what is going on underneath the hood, what is behind the curtain of Oz that is making us do the things that we do. Yep. And now we're at this really interesting juncture in civilization where things don't make sense. I don't know who to trust. I don't know where things are going. I can't predict what tomorrow looks like, next week looks like, next year looks like, and it's making people a little crazy. And so for me to kind of come full circle is that it's really looking at the whole picture, understanding what's iterating at the root, and understanding where the gap is, and see if we can fill this gap with a new way of viewing how we interact with each other. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I like how your background was exactly what you needed to figure out how to look under the hood. Yeah. And or past the veil. Yeah. And to see what's going on, because why we do what we do is really important to understand. Yeah. Instead of just doing it. Right. Why are we doing it? So then picking currency. Yeah. How did that happen?
So, one of the key things that was very obvious to me going through this exercise of understanding decentralized innovations in the energy space, and why some really breakthrough things were not coming to the forefront. Things, amazing technologies using friction, kinetics, motion, all these ways of capturing and repurposing energy that was available technologically, but not available to us. Okay, and so you start to look at the underlying economic game. Who is grandfathered in, and whose project gets green-lighted and whose project does not. And what is the flow of capital? Who creates the money, and how does that money get distributed, and how does that affect the rest of us, right? And so it's a very interesting, instrument of money. And when I looked at that, it's the old saying, follow the money, right? So you follow the money and you see that it's kind of, rotted at the roots in terms of its foundational assumptions and in terms of its use.
And tell us why.
Okay, so currently the instrument of money, and I'll come back one second. So, so you asked me the very direct question, so yes. Why money? So I think the design of currency is really the design of civilization. It is the way we're civil to one another. It's the agreement field in which we operate, right? Yeah. And so now to this question, what you just asked me, is that we have been very good at proving the promise of money. In other words, the instrument of money that we use, that's why it's called a promissory note. It's a promise against which something is going to get produced. Okay? And the structure is, okay, I have this capacity to make more promises, more choices, because I hold this instrument, I've created this instrument against which people will do work. Okay? So this trust around this, we call it a national bond. This is an agreement that this much work will be done against this promissory instrument that we use for exchange, store of value, credit, all of these kinds of things, right? Well, that stuff is backed by an elaborate set of guesswork called gross domestic production, right? So we don't really know if that's going to be produced, whether that's supposed to be produced, whether that producing that actually benefits society as a whole, and then it's on another precarious instrument that in and of itself is in debt. In other words, it's a debt instrument, meaning I don't know. The second part, which is the most interesting part, is that what is the production against that promise? In other words, what is the proof of performance against the proof of promise that we so readily generate? Now, whether it is fiat or crypto, we're very good at creating this proof of promise. This crypto coin promises to do X, Y, Z. And you see what happened in the ICO market, which is very interesting, very much like the dot-com bubble.
This one Bitcoin is worth this amount of dollars.
This amount of dollars, and the logic behind that, and or blockchain will save the world. It's 12 lines of code on Python. We rearrange that as to who gets their transaction passed through why, and so
even with the banking system, it's a digital ledger.
Yeah, but coming down to something very, very basic.
These are the roots that we're
These are the roots. Something very, very basic. Okay, so what's really interesting about the construct of money is from the game of where it's created to where it's implemented and how it's used. So in our lives, okay, if I borrow $5 from you and you want that $5 back, the $5 that you gave me actually comes from there's a proof of both production and there's the performance. You've performed something or you produce something in order for you to have that money. Okay? When you give it to me, you also expect me to perform something or produce something against it. So between me and you, that kind of loop exists, even though it's not clean, it's not really readily understood, it's not clear, but that thing exists. Okay. When an institution,
it's like a non-formal verbal agreement.
It's a non-formal verbal agreement, right? So it exists. But even the formation of that, how I have that money in my pocket, how you have that money in your pocket, is something that we've done in order for us to have it.
I performed, got the money, sent it to you.
I performed something, there's a proof of performance.
And you performed to build a relationship with me enough to where I trusted you. Yeah.
Correct. So you've performed something, you produce something, whether it's within this GDP framework or not, you produce something and you perform something, so you have it, I have it, and you expect that back from me, right? Now, when a bank produces that, they don't have to perform anything. They don't have to prove their performance. You just believe in the promise and you have more promise-making and choice-making capacity as a result of you being the design architect of this instrument, right? So I can just invent money out of thin air. And in fact, that is essentially what happens. This is the reason why we have the idea of inflation in the first place, right? So I can keep making promises against which you produce. And you can keep on producing against that promise. Okay, now, that thing never reconciles, and I have more and more promise-making and choice-making capacity if I'm on the capital side of things. We all work for capital. So whether I'm in the Shark Tank and I'm giving you money and your hard work that you invented something, I give 60% of my company to you because now I have more promise-making and choice-making capacity. You don't. So, and then the return that I'm going to get on that investment is going to give me more promise-making and choice-making capacity, and you won't have it. Same thing with the employee-employer relationship. I hold a ticket, I hold a biosurvival ticket called money, and that thing against which you will perform. And I will have more of it at the end of it. So I'll have more promise-making capacity, more choice-making capacity without being able to prove my performance. I don't have to prove my performance, I'm above it. Okay? Hence, we have this whole thing of the 1%, now that people are aware of the scenario of this dramatic gap in wealth, dramatic inequality, and the dramatic effect on the environment. Right now, we're running up against some very, serious existential challenges. Climate change, political instability, all of these kind of craziness things that are going on in the world where people are going, okay, but I have the money. Well, how good is that money tomorrow? Right? So even the current money supply based on this promise-making capacity rather than proving the ability to actually produce against it, okay, the proof of performance is not in the money. And so proof of performance not being accountable to the centralized institutions that manage our knowledge, that manage our media, manage the distribution of wealth, all of these things are not accountable to produce and or perform against the promissory instruments that they're creating. This creates a huge, huge gap in the way things work. And it's you work more and you earn less. Or you think you earn more, but things cost more as a result. Okay, so you're in this perpetual loop of continuously having to produce because it's already not stacked in your favor. If I have the promise-making capacity, I'm always going to be ahead of you. And the irony of that is, if I have a lot of promise-making capacity, I'm a billionaire, trillionaire, whatever, I'm not happy because I think all of you guys want my shit. Okay? If I don't have anything, I'm not happy either. So either scenario, we are unhappy. And what is the point of living if both ways of existing is now reconciling itself, right? And so the idea of closing the loop on currency is to basically close the promise-making to the production of it. In other words, proof of performance against the proof of promise. When you can close that loop, now you can fundamentally start to change the way we interact with each other, the way we interact with, and we'll unpack that. But yeah, but that's the basic setup.
It seems to be permeating through culture, the notion that money is so important to climb up this hierarchy, earn money, make a living, and then you make that money, and then we see so many people get caught up in materialism or some sort of depressive state or some sort of inability to who to trust. People at the bottom of the socioeconomic strata are like thinking that, oh my gosh, I can barely afford a food, or I can barely afford something, like I'm just clinging to the bottom of the hierarchy. So there just seems to be something wrong with the root system of money because we see that evolve.
Yeah.
So just seeing that evolve says at least something about the root system of money, that there's not an equilibrium of planetary thriving that's occurring. There's a lot of military industrial complexes. There's a lot of corporations that are aiming to manipulate people. There's sacrificing the health and ecology of the planet. So because of all of those things, you look back at the root system and you think, okay, how can it be augmented to build a better future? All right, so now with proof of performance, we're thinking, okay, now rather than can we go back to the $5 example? I already performed something of value to get the money.
Yeah.
You have gained trust with me. You performed to get trust with me. I give you the $5. And then this is now how is this system related to this new architecture that you want to make based on performance?
So what is implicit in that conversation or in that scenario is the trust between me and you, right? So I trust you to do something, you trust me to do something, and you
versus some random person that says, give me $5. I'm like, oh, I've never talked to you before.
Yeah, which just happened right outside, before I come in here. The refugees from this economic paradigm, it's like, yeah, give me $5, man. And I'm like, right.
Refugees from the economic paradigm, yeah.
That's basically what's happening. So in this scenario, there's a reciprocity, there's a mutuality, okay? And if you really look at nature, essentially the arc of civilization has been to match our activity to the cadence of nature. We've been doing that forever, right? And even the way we describe things. So our understanding of nature is reflected in the language, in the way we see things. So for example, in the industrial age, when we discovered machines to do our road tasks for us, we described the heart as a pump, arm as a lever. You know, we looked at things from a very mechanistic point of view. Now we keep talking about my social network. You know, so it's actually an evolution. We talk about my social network, my neural network, all this network. So understanding mycelial understandings of how nature works, we have a deeper understanding. So at each iteration of civilization, we get closer to how nature works versus what we think it is, right? And so right now it's a very interesting time because right now nature operates on mutuality and reciprocity. You plant a seed on the ground and you nurture it and it grows, right? So there's a feedback loop of that. Okay. Way we operate, and very similarly, the way we construct reality is essentially a process of discovery, process of design and development, a process of delivery and distribution. The same thing. It's, you know, the why, what, how of how something works. It's the same way we construct stories of reality. You know, the hero's journey is essentially you have a calling, you go on a quest, you come back with an insight and you inform the tribe. So it's a positive feedback loop of all of these things. Circle of innovation, whatever you want to look at, it's the same basic loop. Same basic loop of, you know, let me ask what's going on. Let me figure out how, you know, let me figure out how to make sense of all this. And then now that I've made sense of it, I'm going to bring that back so that all of us have a deeper understanding. Okay, so this mutuality and reciprocity is kind of our intention. We get sidetracked based on something that we've created as a way to capture that. So it's not, there are no bad guys, good guys, you know, evil so-and-so bankers. It's a crisis of perception. You're not seeing the whole picture because you're only looking at it through your lens. So if I'm on the driver's seat of the promise-making, choice-making capacity, I'm only seeing my side of the equation. I'm not seeing the whole picture. I'm not seeing what it takes to produce. I remember what it was to produce something. Depends on how I earned my money, right? Whether, you know, I came up from nothing, that's one perception, or I came from, you know, inherited legacy wealth, that's another kind of perception. Whatever it is, or I'm in the driver's seat of actually creating these mechanics. So I have a different lens than the person who has to work to produce, who has to keep on proving. You know, it's kind of like, it's always, I'm putting your capacity in question. I don't trust you until you deliver. You know, I'm your employer, do the work, then you'll get your paycheck. I'm the investor, give me your innovation, and then I'll, you know, and then I'll sell your product, or, you know, I'll give you more funding. Whatever, this loop perpetually puts us at odds with one another. We're looking at this whole thing as a win-lose scenario, me versus you. Let me get mine, then I'll give you yours. You know, even in the area of sustainability, even in the area of actually trying to fix the problems that we've created, it's more about, let me figure it out, then I'll give it to you. And then there's a reasoning behind that way of thinking. We understand where that comes from. But we're at this juncture now in civilization where that win-lose generator function does not serve us. If we start from that place of what's yours, what's mine, you know, so talking about these fires, for example, you know, the person who's in the executive seat in this country, right? The way he just kind of described, like, oh, you guys are not doing your job. It's not my problem. Now, that's a despicable human being. We don't have to talk about the way that person is, but that person is a result of this win-loser generator function. It's a result of somebody who basically, what's in it for me? What's in it for me? What's in it for me? So as we start to look at this, oh, those people, they're burning, I'm fine. But we don't exist without one another. So this is the real kind of understanding of our times, that we don't exist in isolation. We never did exist in isolation. You know, even our biological beings, there are more microbes in my body than cells, right? So we're in interdependent symbiosis with all that's around us. So we are that with each other, and we're that with the world. So interestingly, we're complexity in motion. You know, and complexity basically means that we're part of many little things that could change state at any one given time. So you and I are complex beings. The way we organize, how we work with each other is another level of complex social relationships, and how those social relationships relate to the resources that we use. It's another layer of complexity. There's a lot of unknowns. You know, shit can go left. We don't know. We can make a wrong decisions, and that can have, a ripple effect across, across the whole ecosystem, which is the kind of things that we're seeing in the way we burn fossil fuels, the way we are running this economic paradigm, the way the refugees from the economic system that we've seen, the overproduction of things, how we produce and waste things because we want to keep prices in a certain place, how we leverage people's capacity. So many things are the end result of a win-lose thing. I win, you lose. I win, you lose. I win, you lose. Let me win, and then I'll help you win. Even that thing fundamentally is flawed, because a win-lose generator function leads to extinction. There's no reciprocity, there's no mutuality in that win-lose way of thinking. But instead, if I start to think in a win-win reciprocity, which is what happens when you and I are in a relationship with one another, right? So if we care about each other, you know that my well-being is tied to your well-being. I have an understanding of that. I don't approach it from that perspective. I approach it like, if you do well, I do well. If I do well, you do well. Okay? If we start to think in those terms, then all that we've created actually start to serve us. And that's kind of the crux of designing a currency from that vantage point versus the way we've been approaching it thus far.
And then how do we do that, the win-win design?
Well, so
do we have assets that help us too? Which assets are the good ones to help us with this?
Okay, so asset is a really interesting question, right?
Well, the assets, the visual ones that we have.
Oh, visual. Yeah,
which ones are good for this part?
I mean, you can throw up visuals. That's fine. Let's look at it from a different. I mean, you can throw up a visual. That's not really important.
Do you have one that's specifically good for the win-win? Was my question.
No, not specifically.
Not specifically.
Not
Okay,
specifically.
cool.
No, not specifically.
Okay.
No. Okay. So the currency that we're designing is called the O. Mm-hmm. Okay, and the O is something that has both proof of promise and proof of performance built into it. In other words, it's a way of looking at currency where I can have promise-making capacity. So the O actually, without getting into the secret sauce of how it works and all that, but basically you can buy O's, but the O's don't mean anything until you can prove the performance against it. In other words, within a project context, you're actually proving that you do the work. So, and which brings up a very interesting point about.
So I buy O's, and then and then how do I prove that I'm performing?
Within the context of a project. So project is anything that requires more than myself to do, which is everyday activities that we already do, right? And
like the show.
Like the show.
So so for this show, I would buy O's, and then we would perform this show.
Right.
And then what would I do
and
at the end of the show?
So you have some intended outcome of this show, right? So you know this show is successful if it had someone viewership or retweets, or basically you'd want to understand that this was received. This was received, and this was integrated, and this change. I think you're in the perception game, which is that's another topic in and of itself that's quite interesting, right? So
adding more of the lenses to an issue.
Adding more of lenses to an issue, being able to see things from multiple perspectives.
Totally.
And that ultimately changes the way we operate in the world. From the minute, we all know about the overview effect, the minute we can see the Earth from space, it fundamentally changes global commerce, global telecommunications, everything, because now you have a whole picture of something. It's interesting, the year, I believe it, my numbers could be off, but it was around the 20s, right? When the year the speedometer came out in a moving vehicle, it reduced traffic fatalities by 78 or 79%, something like that, okay? Which is very telling, because people didn't know how fast they were going. Once they can see how fast they were going, it fundamentally changes behavior, right? So this is very interesting. So many interfaces we already understand. When you look at the weather, if it's cloudy outside, or right now with the fires, it looks like Beijing outside, and you know what that means. So when you see it, we all understand it's a universal interface. Okay.
Okay, so then this example with the
So,
O's.
so an example of the O's is, okay, I got a bunch of O's. Okay.
Because you bought them with currency or
Well,
cryptocurrency.
well, okay. So
or you can earn them from doing a project.
you can earn, yeah, that's the whole thing. So so whether it's proof of promise or proof of performance, in either scenario, I have the capacity of creating a form of currency that is actually current. So this is what I mean by kind of a real-time trust currency. It's actually current because I can trust you to perform whatever that is because you've proven that within the context of a project. You know, and a project is something we do together, like, for example, the show, or, you know, producing the shirt that you're wearing, I'm wearing. Anything that we are doing is essentially something that a bunch of humans come together to do. Okay, now within that context, there's many, many loops of, okay, I have an idea. Is that idea good enough to be, you know, something we should produce against? Okay, then if something that we need to produce against, what are the resources we need to produce that? If we have those resources, is that something that is going to be benefit of, is that going to benefit how people are going to be receiving it? And so is there, lack of a better word, is there a market for it? Okay, so is this going to be received? Is this going to create benefit? Is this something that's worth creating, and who gets to benefit and why? That whole process of doing that, you perform certain things, I perform certain things, somebody else performs another certain thing, and as they do that performance over time, now I know within that context I can trust them.
Yeah.
Right?
For that specific performance that they've gotten good at.
And
then what do I do with the O's with their performance? I'm trying to get something that they know how to perform well, so they've built trust, so I give them O's for that. How does that?
Yeah, so the O's are two things. One is, it's just like regular money. You can use it to actually help something along. So I'm making a promise, but I'm doing both things. I'm not only making the promise, which is the kind of money that we have. Crypto is also like that I'm making a promise that in the future it will be worth X, right? So right now, you know, the global money supply is less than 5% utility, is what I believe the promise is worth today. More than 95% is speculative. That's crazy. That's crazy in a world when we have real-time information of knowing future information in the present. You know, your map tells you down to the minute what time I arrived at the studio. I actually knew that on my phone, right? So my map tells me down to the minute future information in the present. We exchange real-time information in all kinds of communication exchanges all the time. So we can know the production cost of something before the thing is even produced. That's essentially what crowdfunding, crowdsourcing is. You put something up in escrow, and until the thing is done, nothing gets allocated to that. So we mitigate the risk of cost of goods sold, cost of inventory, cost of sales. Many of those things that used to be things that you used to hedge bets against in the future are knowable in the present. So all these things are known. Okay. So the idea of speculation and continuing to incur more and more gaps in the promise to production really doesn't make much sense in the way where we are today digitally. It really doesn't make much sense because we actually information is knowable in the present. So in the context of a project, just like we talked about, your capacity to actually perform is known. It is known, or it's knowable, okay? Because I've proven myself within the context of a project multiple times. So if that is known, then I can trust you to perform that relative to my project. Whether that project is producing something that is to be consumed, or whether that project is producing something to be experienced, whatever that is, within that context, I know your capacity, and not just your capacity, everyone else in the network's capacity relative to that. Okay. Now what that's doing is now it's creating a whole other sort of trust paradigm. Trust, as you all well know, is really, there's no algorithm for trust. Trust is essentially my life experience projected onto a context, right? So you trust me based on whatever life you've lived. I trust you based on whatever life I've lived, right? So in that scenario, we trust each other to, let's say, do this show. Okay. Beyond that, I don't know if I can trust you. If I
with like $1,000 investment in something,
whatever, something, we don't know that, right? So we don't know what that is. But if I've proven that again over and over,
to take my mom somewhere,
who knows, right? So, but yeah, I'm a good guy.
yeah.
I'm good for it.
Totally.
Okay. So sometimes it's inferred.
So water my plants while I'm gone.
Right. Yeah. Water your plants while you're gone.
Sure.
Whatever that is. Okay. So trust is life experience projected onto a context.
I want to know how the O's work in the performance-based economy.
So the way the O's work is that the O is no good until the promise of performance is accounted for. In other words, okay, until I know the work that is going to be done against the O has literally zero network value. Okay, so, but it has promissory value, just like regular money does.
Has potential.
It's potential, just like regular money does.
Okay,
so you can use it.
I'm saying I'm going to interview Ray. There's no worth to the O's. Then I interview Ray.
Then there's a worth to the O. So within the context, the O have proven itself, right? And so
how do you know how many O's that's worth, and what does that mean?
That's something that's determined between me and you.
Between you and I.
Between you and I, or between our audience, between whoever is participating within that project context. So within that project context, if we decide this is worth 1,000 O's, it's worth 500 O's.
And then what do we say? Then what happens with those 1,000 or 500 O's or whatever?
So now
do you gain those as O experiences?
Like, yeah. So the idea is that by doing it like this, what we're doing essentially is creating more and more capacity to actually make the promise of performance visible. So
it's like you're showing what level you're at.
You're showing you what level you're at. And so if you do that, what you essentially do is you actually create a deflationary currency. So we're used to currencies that are inflationary. Your parents will tell you, back in my day, $1 used to buy me whatever. And now, look how expensive.
Loaf of bread, some eggs.
Loaf of bread, some eggs, yeah, something like that. So, and then you go, now it's not so much, not the case. And this is true everywhere in the world, right? So that is not the case. Okay, and part of the reason that is not the case is we talked about that a little earlier, is what happens is if you're on the promise-making side, the production is never going to catch up. Because I have to prove my performance, I just have to show my bank account.
So many promises and so little performance. So now it's so much performance and less promises, but just lots and lots of performance, and then trying to put the O's on those performances.
Correct.
That way your O's are kind of like your experience points.
The O's get more valuable over time, not less. You don't have to pump the market with more O's. You can actually start to kind of actually work the other way. You can, remember there's a movie, Benjamin Button? You go backwards. You actually go, you go backwards to essentially you become the O, right? So if I am the culmination of all the proof of performance against the proof of promise, then I'm essentially what happens in real life. We are actually walking examples of social currency and social capital. We get around based on the nature or the strength of our relationships, which is also fascinating because the project that you are working on, you were speaking to, which is about the quality of relationships in social networking 3.0. What does that look like? Instead of quantity of relationships, and even if you think about, okay, why focus on quality versus quantity? Okay, the whole thing around having quantity of connections because it increases my chance of capturing attention. If I capture attention, that is convertible to
relevance,
power, more promise-making and choice-making capacity. So right now, it's about creating attention at any cost. This is part of the reason why we're not trusting our institutions anymore. Part of the reason, like, who's telling the right story? Who's telling the right story? Who do I believe? Before, you have venerable institutions, whether it's universities or whether it's governments or what have you, that actually procured knowledge multi-generationally, and then they distributed it out, right? And so we knew predictably what was going to happen next. You know, we had an idea that, okay, under these conditions, under this setup, this is what I can expect. Okay, so I can have trust in the system, quote unquote, right, to have this thing move forward in that way. Okay. Now, the capacity to communicate that is available to everyone. Everyone's a media channel, everyone's a government, everyone's, you know, it's like, so what happens? It goes to the lowest common denominator. Whoever is best at generating attention, they get the attention, and now they get the choice-making and promise-making capacity.
Not the ones with the knowledge.
Not necessarily the ones with the knowledge, yeah.
The highest.
Yeah, even the premise of this show, like bringing back, you know, these kind of long-form intellectual conversations, okay. This is missing from this space.
Thank you, Ron. Continue, right?
Right, this is missing from this space. So you're bringing it back for a reason, because the distribution method of this is much more fluid. Right? So it is actually at par with the people Instagramming their lunch, and you're hoping that you know
someone might want to talk about closing the loop on currency rather than seeing a photo of a salad.
Right.
Sure. Because they get the same amount of recognition, even though one is about something knowledgeable, the other one might be, you know, maybe I should try tomato with walnuts on my salad.
Yeah, well, that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Sure.
Right, but the whole point is, if you have a currency system where we're co-invested in the outcome, co-invested in each other's success, okay, because in order for me to have proof of performance against the proof of promise, I have to close the loop.
Okay, so we're making win-wins.
We're making win-wins.
And that's going to change to a state of abundance in the world rather than scarcity.
Scarcity, extraction, all of these things. Technology is agnostic. It doesn't, you know, with a pencil, you know, you can write a ransom note, or you can create a masterpiece. You know, with a hammer, you know, I can build a building, or I can bludgeon you to death, right? Yes. Either is possible. So technology is agnostic. So we're afraid of, you know, emerging technology, super intelligent machines, machine learning, you know, AI, all of these kinds of things that are emerging in our space, robotics, automation. People fear they're losing their jobs. All these kinds of exponential technical innovations are coming online. If we look at our, you know, cryptocurrency, blockchain, this whole idea of mining a proof of promise into existence, that in and of itself is kind of crazy, right? So I don't believe, because you're not a centralized institution, that you can actually make the promise. So I'm going to burn arbitrary computational cycles to prove that this promise-making tool is real. Okay. As a result, I am burning fossil fuel-based power generation capacities, even if I do it with solar panels. Well, what is the energy return on investment on solar panels? There is a externality cost. So what happens is, within a win-lose thing, we ignore the externalities. And like I said, back to the beginning, nature is about reciprocity and mutuality. You cannot ignore some shit. It's going to come back full circle. You cannot continue to have an economic paradigm where you're paying off, basically the equivalent of paying off one credit card debt with another. Eventually it comes full circle. You know, whatever the metaphor is, you can't keep shitting in your kitchen and expect it not to smell, right?
So, Ray, let's make sure that we make this example super relatable and easy to digest as possible. Okay, so
you have an idea, okay? You have an idea to produce something, produce this show, whatever. Okay. Is that a good idea? Okay. Is that a good idea? Well, the people who would want to see the show, or people who would want to help you produce that show, would have to validate that idea by upvoting something, right? Okay, now, if organically I wasn't able to achieve it, I can make promises to achieve it. In other words, I can buy the difference with O's that I would purchase, right? If not, it doesn't move on to the next threshold. It moves on to the next threshold. Okay, in that scenario, I would actually go, okay, in order for me to produce this, I need this kind of expertise. Who do I trust that has this kind of expertise that can actually make this happen for me. Right? So those kinds of people come together. Now we speak to an audience. Do you want to see this? And what is it worth to you to see something like this? Okay. So in each instance of this, you are now removing the friction from an idea to impact, whatever that impact scenario is. Okay. Now closing the idea to impact loop is very, very important, because by doing that, now you're giving some meaning behind this construct of an O, because it's
making impact, gaining O's because you're having performance.
Right.
Maybe are people giving you the O's so that you gain O's in the performance, or how does that work? Every time I have an interview, I gain more O's. How does this?
No, your O gains more value, because
my 1 O.
Your 1 O gains more value.
And what is value measured with? A
so
number?
Value is measured with okay. I want to keep the mechanics at bay a little bit. The reason being is that we are producing a white paper, media, all of these things to explain these things in much more detail from the perspective of where we are in the world and how does this benefit the challenges that we see in front of us. So in a way, I don't want to kind of reveal the mechanics of the whole thing at this stage in the game, but I will speak to conceptually, what this means, what the implications are.
I look forward to talking about the mechanics, because I think there are a lot of people that are trying to figure out what to move forward with currency, how to best move forward, and it'll be really good to actually talk about mechanics, because the mechanics are what's differentiating between this as well as so many other of these planetary architectures around currency. And I just want to make sure that the mechanics are relatable, they're easy for people to understand, but they make total sense with the proof of performance and the proof of value, etc. But I get your why, the win-win, and using technology as something that's beneficial with the mutuality
and reciprocity, already kind of built into the equation, right?
To get to abundance.
And
I think several people now have started to talk to me about that vision, architecting a system that has that vision.
Yeah.
And then the mechanics is the differentiator between people. It's what are the mechanics that are going to lead you to success there. But I know your background with, especially now you're looking at these new developing markets, India, Africa, and there's just so much potential with the population demographics being so much at the bottom of the pyramid in terms of age, that there's so many freshly birthed people in these parts of the world, that it gives a tremendous amount of potential upswing on their creative actualization into the world. So to be able to go and bring them the tools and resources they need to actually succeed, to build that abundance is really important. And I'm glad that you care about entering those markets.
So it's many things, right? So first of all, I think the whole, even calling it a bottom of a pyramid, is the result of the win-lose generator function.
But I said bottom of pyramid in terms
of... No, I understand.
Age, though, age.
Yeah, and in terms of age as well.
Demographics,
right, so 54% of the population, the world's population, are people...
The top of the pyramid would be people that are 80 years old.
Right.
That's what I mean, yeah.
So more than half of the population are people that are in their 20s or younger.
In Africa?
In Africa and India. Okay, so
India.
Okay, now
more than half are under 20. More 20 and under.
Of the world, more than half of the world's population, 54% of the world's population is that. Okay, now this is.
But hasn't that always been that way?
No, this is a recent phenomenon of kind
of lots of births in those areas.
Lots of births, deaths. Just generationally, what we have iterated to at this point. Now these people are within a win-lose scenario, are not going to be the beneficiaries of the promise of progress that we've been living thus far. They're just simply not. And part of...
But don't they have some promise of progress with their increases in electricity and food and water, right?
Okay, so it depends on what lens you look at. So I spent a month and change in India, and I saw this firsthand. You tell me how this scenario actually looks like it's promising. So it's the workforce of most of the world. People are, hardworking, talented, educated, resourceful individuals, all in their 20s, most of them all in their 20s, okay? Working 14-plus-hour days. And at the end of it, you're earning 1/5 or 1/6 of their counterpart in the developed parts of the world. Okay. Now, with that, your diet consists of all of the most profitable food-like products, the soft drinks, the processed foods, and all of that. And because, again, you disconnected from how nature works to what is profitable. It's a win-lose scenario. So the win-lose scenario creates these monoculture-based agriculture, all of these can make things complicated, right? So in India, for example, less than 40 years ago, you used to have 200,000 varieties of rice. Now there's 3. Okay, now, right. So which is not just in India, but everywhere. So the reason people have gluten allergies and all these other things, is a result of lack of biodiversity in the crops, how that responds to our genome, how that responds to our genotypes, phenotypes. All of these things are there's a disconnect. There's a systemic disconnect. So as a result, so what it looks like in India is young people work all the time. Every corner there's a pharma shop with unregulated prescription drugs available over the counter, just like you can buy candy from anywhere. Okay. Every corner, there's a diabetic and thyroid center, which is very telling of the number of customers that are actually experiencing those health risks. Okay, you have unregulated products in the marketplace, selling cigarettes that are 30% tobacco, rest is fillers. So a lot of these things, pesticides, all kinds of stuff is going on, and the quality of life and quality of health, you get a cold, you get antibiotics. It is horrific. And even the waste, there's a company in Hyderabad, puts out, this guy Reddy puts out like 100,000 times more pharma waste into the water. This is in the drinking supply. So people are getting sick and dying, and they're doing the work of the world, the stuff that we don't want to do, the hardcore database management stuff, the system architecture stuff. And you're being promised a lifestyle that is technically unattainable even within this capitalist paradigm. So, in the major metropolitan areas, like let's say like a city like Mumbai, you have this thing where you have these flats that are $500,000 or more in value. They're part of these kind of societies that have 10,000, 5,000 units. Okay. You're bringing in water from outside, you're generating energy by burning fossil fuels, and it's had 50 to 60% occupancy, and the rent is equivalent to somebody's monthly income. So what ends up happening is people are basically living like roommates in a roommate situation, much like what's happening in the Bay Area here, with advanced degrees in education. They have an aspirational model that is unattainable, and you have a real estate or investment model that's based on speculation that I'm just trying to fill these units, but just from all looks of things, this thing is going to collapse.
So there's some real unsustainable processes and systems that are going on around the planet. Totally right, yes.
Right.
There's also some really good societal progress that's being made, amount of people getting access to electricity.
Electricity, internet, all of these kinds of things.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and getting access to clean water, becoming disease-free, this type of stuff. But I totally agree with you that there is a different sort of architecture that needs to come into play to ameliorate the problems that you're listing. There's a whole bunch that that can be unpacked about what we're talking about right now, and what you're producing here is just one way to lens.
Yeah, so we'll talk about this. We're platform agnostic. We're actually creating a protocol, not a platform, because platform again is about win-lose. It's about silos. It's about data silos that kind of hoard information rather than share information, right? So we are creating a platform agnostic or platform independent protocol. If you forward that slide, we can speak to it. It's the one with the hand. But the one with the hand.
Couple forward.
Yeah.
Probably a couple forward.
There we go. Okay. Cool. So this way we can integrate. So okay, before I talk about this, I'm gonna just come back to the topic of this huge potential of the underserved. Okay. So you have people in these regions that have ideas, because the world that is promised to them, if you're smart enough, you realize it's unattainable.
Yeah.
If you're not smart enough to realize it's unattainable, you're still working your ass off and not getting the rewards.
I feel as though what you were saying about that is, quite true in many ways, that it is extremely difficult to have a promise be fulfilled in an unsustainable sort of way. That's horrible. But for these promises to be fulfilled in more sustainable ways is kind of the path that we're trying to pave, is that if you want these greater standards of living in a sustainable way, through a sustainable systems architecture, more and more people on the planet can get these.
More and more people on the planet can get these, and it is not only attainable, we actually, our collective intelligence comes into play. So you may have an idea, but you don't know if that idea is relevant to the network. Okay? And so by creating a protocol-based approach, what you're essentially doing is you are able to drop an idea, see if that idea tracks. We talked about this theme before in terms of projects. So see if that idea tracks, and we can kind of, what I'd like to call, Twitterize it. And what I mean by that is this, is that, if you look at the evolution of communication or evolution of any technology, it is removing the friction between intention and impact. Right? So before, if you had to produce this show, you'd have to have a television station, all the capital investment set up.
There's been a lot of democratization, which has helped a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I wanted to also talk about the protocols that you were talking about earlier, not a platform, but a protocol, but that's part of the mechanics and part of your white paper.
Yeah. So, but I will speak to that. So basically what we realize is that there's components that actually enable people to produce relevant applications for their context, for the scenarios that they're in. So for all of these underserved people, whether you're in a space of creating agricultural prosperity, kind of decentralized, democratized access to agricultural innovations and enabling that to scale, or an urban population, I may have ideas, but I don't know if my ideas are good enough to actually be beneficial to the network. Okay, so I need ways of amplifying those ideas. I need ways of validating those ideas. I need ways of producing those ideas. I need a way to connect the education around those ideas. What should I be learning? And what should I be producing? And how do I learn and how do I produce? And so this whole lens of actually project-based education, project-based entrepreneurship, project-based employment, project-based something where there's a tangibility. In other words, proof of performance already is implicit in that activity.
Project-based and proof of performance go hand in hand.
Go hand in hand.
And then that's where the O comes in to be of value
around
that.
Exactly. That's where the O comes in to be of value around that. And so our protocol is essentially, the protocol is the one protocol, which means one network entrustment. So instead of an idea of a bond, which is a debt instrument, because I don't know the work that's going to be done against it, the one network entrustment is essentially a proof of performance that is actually backing that instrument. And so as a result, when you share within the context of an O-based project learning environment, whether it be in agriculture, whether it be in urban settings, or whether it be in, story creation, whatever, what have you, your profile value increases. So it enables you to actually share information rather than hoard it. Today, we don't share IP, this whole thing about intellectual property.
So then we have in each individually within the protocol a O value ascribed to us, and then depending on how many project-based experiences we partake in, how much knowledge we share, how much that value is then that we gain a higher O ascribed to us based on how other people rank these projects, how they upvote them and whatnot.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so you're kind of, in a sense, is like this is an it's a, like you said, it's not a platform, it's a protocol.
It's a protocol.
So in this protocol, we all 7.5 billion people have a value ascribed to them based on how many projects they're getting involved in, how much value they're bringing, and then other people are upvoting on the value and the projects. Correct. And then your O's increase in ascribed value, and then that's how you become maybe a figure of authority, of power, of something of that people trust. Yeah, that's how you create trust.
And very much like how real life works. You know, very much like, you know, we
can't say that same thing about money, right?
We can't say the same thing about money because in the context of money, the proof of performance is a guess.
It's
a guess. Right now, like, see, so today we know I can agree a dollar is worth a dollar.
It could have been an inheritance, or
it's a guess.
It's a guess.
It's a guess.
It might not have been that this person has actually performed to attain the money.
Right.
Interesting.
Right. So what we're doing is we're taking guesswork.
We'll wrap after this last bit, and then we'll continue on another conversation soon. Yes.
Wonderful.
Yes.
So we're moving from
guesswork.
Taking out the guesswork of economics to a network effect of economics. So the network, so now the protocol is essentially the components of engagement within a project environment. So there's many things that we can create. So we already have the kind of code set and the baseline for these 5 things. So one is the idea of identity. Okay, so my sovereign identity. So I can kind of come back. Can you go back to that slide, please?
One more time, Ron.
Yeah,
go back there. And we're about to wrap.
So
shortly.
The whole idea of identity is my sovereign self. So sovereignty means I can act within my capacity, my maximum agency within a context. That's how I would deal with complexity. The more stuff you know, the more you can respond to something.
Wait. How do we live with a value that is ascribed to us, a value of O? How do I get food and shelter and water?
Yeah, so in context, so we're basically allowing people to design their own applications using these toolkits. So one is how do I create a sovereign identity? Second is how do I participate in an interchange? How do I produce a project with other people in my network? Okay, how do I manage those investment flows? It's a multi-asset, multi-token way of managing those flows. How do I interact or communicate with one another? So kind of a decentralized telephony solution.
So there could be a spinach stand somewhere, and then I have earned a certain amount of value or O's by being performance, and they have as well.
Yeah.
And then how do we exchange that? How does that?
Well, you're actually understanding the symbiosis between that spinach stand and your lifestyle, because you're now seeing how that relates to what you are doing. Before, that person is earning money, you're earning money, and you have a bunch of blind spots. You don't know what they're going to do with their money. You don't know what you're going to do with their money. Here, your fates are aligned or co-invested. So eventually,
so if someone's O's are not valued enough, they haven't performed yet, then they can't get.
They can make up the difference with promissory notes. So they can buy into it and say, you know what, okay, I haven't proven myself. And so this is how we transition from this existing fiat world of not knowing, what the future value of this thing is. So even if I hoard a lot of money today, okay, it could very well go the way of Venezuela. I think there's a slide in there somewhere with the value of the Venezuelan currency right now. Yeah. It's pretty crazy, right? So it's not even worth toilet paper. It's the one. It's a big stack of money next to a piece of toilet paper, right? Right. So right now, that thing is worth less than a roll of toilet paper. That amount of money, right?
That's actually true?
That's actually true today.
That's so horrible.
That's crazy, right? So basically,
that is so horrible.
So it's meaningless. So you want to kind of reverse this flow. You want to reverse this flow by actually creating a deflationary currency. And that has a whole bunch of other implications. And if you want to break now, we can come back to that. But that has a whole bunch of implications as to how, we move forward in society. Because a lot of the things that we're seeing, including the UN SDGs, they're symptomatic of this win-lose game. This win-lose game with exponential technical capacity towards a win-lose game does not create mutuality and reciprocity. It actually accelerates the opposite. So what we create is, I have exclusivity and you do not. I have more and more exclusivity, you have less and less exclusivity. And the more I create that, the more we disconnect from each other, the more we disconnect from nature, the more we disconnect from what would create a quality of life for us going forward. So if you want to put that back, you have to get to the very root essence of it. Is, this is no good until you can prove the performance. If you do that, then everything else kind of recirculates around that.
Yeah. I have a lot more questions about the mechanics and protocols that we'll need to get into. Ron, since you're training Sarah as well, since you guys are both back there, would you like us to wrap, or would you be okay with continuing?
I'm just trying to have a good time before I'm dead here, so whatever.
Would you?
Yeah, whatever. No, I'm having a blast. Go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead.
All right.
Take it.
So we'll just go a little longer. I want to, because I think we finally started getting to the essence of what you want to get done. It took a while for me to at least get it.
Yeah.
But I liked when you added project-based endeavoring alongside the platform of earning, ascribing value to people based on how much performance they've done. Now that's starting to make sense, and the performance is based in these project-based performance, and you get ascribed a value. And okay, there's still so much more to understand about the mechanics and protocols, about how does one actually get electricity, how does one get food, get water, all this type of stuff. And if you're ascribed a certain value of O, then you get it, and then they, for some reason, are giving it to you.
Yeah. So a lot of things, the way we. Okay. So if you get to the root of something and you just flip it 180, it's going to have like a butterfly effect on the entire paradigm of how we've been living to date. Okay, so right now is like I said, we're living very precarious and interesting times, right? So climate change is upon us. There's 80 trillion that have been trillion or billion that have been invested towards climate change action. I believe it's. I'll look that.
Probably has to be billion.
Yeah, billion. Yeah, billion. That's been allocated to that. But you don't need that much to actually reverse the tide. If you fundamentally change it at the root, it will have a whole bunch of spiraling effects around it. So when you talk about how do I get my electricity, how do I get my food, how do I get my transportation, there are certain assumptions in place around those questions. Okay.
There are, totally, because we've only had an exchange system.
So now it becomes a question like, who produces the food? Who produces the transportation? Who owns this asset? Who manages this asset? What is the game that they're playing in order for them to be in business? So all these things, like when you change something at the root, it has reciprocal effects across the entirety of how we wound up civilization this way. So it creates the bizarro version of the world that we live in today. So in other words, like, let's say you have a shared economy service like an Uber. Okay, right now you trust a construct like Uber to be able to deliver, so you'd be able to trust the driver, trust the passenger, to be able to get you from point A to point B. Okay, so you can create all kinds of peripheral businesses. And now, if I can authenticate a user's identity, okay, and their O value is tied to my O value. In other words, their proof of performance is tied to the proof of promise of whatever that unit of exchange is in that space. Okay, what happens to who gets what and why is fundamentally different. So a bunch of us, if somebody's got a car, somebody can drive, and somebody needs a ride, we can make our own. And that's the fundamental difference. We can actually make our own of things. Is decentralized agency and democratizing capacity is the norm, not the exception. This has been happening throughout civilization for as long as we can remember, right? So we have more and more capacity. Now
I want to know. Yeah, I want to know how this. If my normal perception, which I've been born into, and everyone has been now, was that when I want to get on the bus to go to the next place that I want to go to, that I need to pay $2 to get onto that bus. Now, how would that system be architected so that the owner of that asset is willing to accept me as a passenger onto that bus without an exchange of $2? What would that look like?
Okay, so if your family owned a restaurant, do you pay to eat there? Maybe, maybe not. Okay, now.
Okay, so I see how that changes things. So if you own the asset of the bus, you wouldn't pay to get on the bus.
Okay, so now the objective of the bus is transportation as a service.
It's not to make money. It's to transport people.
It's to transport people.
But then also to make enough to be able to
correct.
Add another bus route to help people get to more places.
Correct. So there's two things at play here. So one is that the whole thing is to transport people, and the proof of performance is how well are you transporting people, okay? And how satisfied the transportees and the transporters are performing within that loop, within that scenario. Okay, so you as a transporter, the bus, people who are running the operations of the bus or producing the bus or creating the bus routes, okay, in one category. If you're riding the bus, using the bus, you're in another category. Before, you're on your own. Okay, I'm paying, you're doing, and so I'm,
distinction between the selves.
Selves,
sure.
right.
Yeah.
In this scenario, actually, you are now co-creating this transportation reality together.
Okay. And how does it work?
Okay.
Yeah.
So that means that if I am adding value to making transportation a better experience for everyone involved, then the value of my O increases. If I'm adding value to make transportation more efficient and accessible, or kind of minimizing the waste in that transportation loop, that also makes so that also makes
so people are like upvoting my bus route, and then I'm able to somehow add more bus routes based on people upvoting me, and then people can ride the bus.
Yeah, this is like real-time supply and demand meeting, rather than the speculation of I'm going to need this much bus routes, I'm going to need these people to do this,
yes.
right?
Yes.
So you're actually understanding it because you're negotiating it on the fly. You're actually realizing what each other need because both of you are co-invested in creating more value for the O's that you're using to make that thing happen. Your individual value in the network increases. The better I am participating, the better I can prove my performance relative to that outcome. So the more I do that, the easier it is, so my bus ride becomes free, or actually I'm adding value by optimizing the bus route, or I'm adding value by manufacturing the bus parts. I'm adding value to creating a more efficient bus, or a less material intensive bus, or less you're not looking at the whole thing from a whole different perspective, because now the whole game is different.
That's probably the hardest part about the way that you think, is to be able to think about it from a whole different perspective, because we're so entrenched into the money game that it's so difficult to take a step out of the money game and envision civilization using things differently with O's instead of money. Because even the way that Bitcoins and cryptocurrencies work in so many ways with these tokenomics is in so many ways similar to money, and exchanging again, just tokens or coins for goods or services. Again, it's just a very much so. It's not a system like this O system is. Yeah. So in the O system, everything is win-win. Everything is progressing, moving. I see it as something that moves forward like a linear time would. Yeah. Like O is constantly moving forward. Yeah. So everything's constantly win-winning. Yeah. That's how I see it. But now the last question is then how do the exchanges work as everything moves forward? That's been my question.
I think they self-adjust. I think they self-adjust relative to context, right? So
there's constantly a dynamic way that it's interplaying based on what people want in real time, what they need in real time, correct, and whatnot.
Correct. Yes. Because it's in your best interest to check the assumptions behind the actions. Why am I doing this? So why
the O values are shifting based
relative to human values.
Relative to human values.
Right. So why am I doing this? What benefit am I creating for the whole? Because the more I create benefit to the network as a whole, the more, so my capacity, my contribution determines my capacity. The more effectively I can contribute, the more my proof of performance is accounted for, the more I'm valued in the system. So I am much more, so you're basically gamifying people to contribute rather than to consume for personal purposes. You're actually,
that's really important.
That's very important.
That's actually probably one of the most important parts of everything that we've been talking about. Yeah. Gamifying it so that people want to contribute rather than consume.
Right. Yeah. Consumption is a natural human thing. You want to consume, but to what end?
To what end? If you only consume, you never contribute. It's not good. If you, you got to consume food and electricity and water in order to live. So there you go. So you need to do that at least. But when you gamify contribution, again, because it's based on proof of performance, you have to perform, then that's where you get a system that's constantly moving forward like that. I totally see it.
So food, water, energy, like if we talk about all these things, the way we produce them, the way we distribute them, all these things. Everything in our natural world is materials and energy, right? So it's really the equation between material and energy. So human energy, human intention, like all of these things are built with somebody saying, so when we talked about like what kind of asset are you talking about? Asset is a really funny concept. Asset is part perception and part production against that perception, right? So like something like this, right, used to be a bunch of dirt and glass less than 100 years ago. You didn't know that this could be used as a global telecommunication device, okay, that you have access to so many things using a device like that. So that never existed in the space, but in order for that thing to become an asset, one, you had to perceive the possibility of something like that, and then you had to actually produce the components to make that thing, right? And so similarly, all the things that we use today, the way we use energy, the way we use water, the way we distribute any goods or services, okay, all these things are based on some fundamental assumptions of who gets what and why. So if it's about me winning in order for me to survive, then that looks one kind of way, but it looks completely differently if I say, in order for me to produce this thing, we have to look at it how this is a win-win. If it's not a win-win, this cannot move forward. And if it cannot move forward, then it's not in the benefit of. So you're actually kind of assumption checking, fact checking, relevance checking, built into the design of the game itself. So the project context actually create that. Now,
creating the win-wins.
Creating the win-win. Okay. So now, first of all,
last thought, and then we'll wrap.
So last thought is, this is not meant to be prescriptive. Like I said, this is not a platform. This is not meant to be something that, okay, I figured it out or we figured it out and now we're going to share this with the world. It's not so much about that. It's more about kind of putting out something into the world that allows us to now participate and create value where there is direct need. So, coming back to India, Africa, underserved markets all around the world, is there are many, many people who are suffering they're economic refugees at a global level. Okay, so they're suffering from this economic paradigm of a win-lose. They have a lot to contribute. They have a lot to produce. Okay, there are a lot of education, project-based learning, project-based education, project-based improving the quality of people's lives that are present right now. Okay, we are engaging in actually doing those pilot projects in those specific locations. So the thing is, a lot of the questions you ask me, yes, we have ideas, we have frameworks, we have understanding, but we really don't know. And the whole thing is, there's no way I can know, or you can know, or the people that we're working with, our team, you know, we cannot possibly know everything. But we can ask the questions so that we can invite in better questions that reveal better answers, and that perpetually create a whole other win-win loop of how do we respond to the catastrophic changes that are in front of us. You know, do we look that literally? I mean, right now, we don't really have a choice.
win-win loop in answer to the big problems of society.
Right, right.
That's what you're working on.
Yeah, exactly. So project context is a starting point. Generating interest and investment towards actually making these things a reality. Because where we are today, we're at an early stage. We have some baseline technology, some baseline design, some baseline way of producing, you know, local applications, etc. That's just a starting point. We still need to be able to tell the story of what a win-win scenario looks like.
Yes.
You know.
Yes. Because next time we'll not only talk about all of the mechanics and protocols in more detail, but I want to go to the bus story and the restaurant story, because you give a really good example of, you know, if your family owns a restaurant, do you pay? No, the answer is no. So then, you know, what does it look like when you adjust these variables in these different ways as you move things forward? Looking across the world, how do you make how do you make civilizational progress a win-win for people? This is
and then the critical part is we don't have time. And here's the thing, you know, so I'll just leave on the note of time, right? So when we're seeking wealth, we're essentially seeking quality of time. When we're seeking recognition for our contribution, we're seeking quality of time. So this time is running out under the win-lose function. In a win-win function, we have everything and time. And so that's very, very important. So
that's huge.
Quality of time is everything. It's about perception. It's actually understanding ourselves, our consciousness relative to the whole. So this is a very important thing, because the way we're going right now, literally from everything that it looks like we have nothing. We're running out of time. We're going to go extinct. Extinctionary event is upon us. So we can see that.
Ron loves the loves the extinctionary events.
But I think we can do complete opposite. We can do complete opposite. We can we can thrive. So literally we can live in a very abundant fashion where we take care of me and you, because we make ourselves accountable. We create mutuality and reciprocity once again. We close the loop. Hence this whole idea of a circular currency, thus the O, because it's a full circle way of understanding reality. It's a full circle way of being civil to one another. It's a full circle way of reestablishing the trust between you and me and you, and to the way we organize things, and to the way we relate to nature. So now we're coming back to who we are already. So we're not reinventing anything. We're actually coming back to who we are. We're coming back to zero, because that's where we've always been.
I love the idea of thinking about a future where there's so much prosperity that time becomes this, we can just chill through time and do time in a way that is not the same paradigm that time is now.
Correct.
I really look forward to that. Ray, it's so exciting to talk to you about solving one of humanity's most pressing challenges that will then solve so many other of the pressing challenges. And it's kind of the roots. It's the roots of all of the problems, is this, the way we close the loop on currency and the way that we create abundance through win-win. It's very interesting, and I'm glad that you're tackling this. It's extremely difficult, and that's why as I'm asking questions, I'm learning, and it's hard to balance all these variables and conversations as you're teaching. But there will be, you know, when we come back, there will be more that you will have done and developed, and I will come back with more questions and a better understanding of things. Ray Potter, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Show and talking to us. This has been such a pleasure. Really appreciate you a lot. Thank you. Thank you everyone for tuning in. We really appreciate it. Let us know what you think in the comments about this. Ray would also love to hear from you. The links are all below in the bio. Go and check out Ray's work, please. Also, thank you, Ron. Thank you, Sarah, for producing and directing. We greatly appreciate you. And go and build the future. Go and manifest your dreams into the world, people. Thank you so much, and we will see you soon. Peace.